All right, let me stop you guys there. So, what is Melville trying to say? And is he correct? Is he right? Let me start with you, Maddie. What do you think?
Well, I was basically saying that they're probably testing the people of everything, because it said at the years of the war they were testing their devotion to the Union. So now, in the time of peace, they're testing how well they can develop the peace.
Sure, that's fair. That's a good point. Did the years of war try or put on trial how devoted we were to the Union? Absolutely. Absolutely. And the answer was yes. We were devoted enough. We fought. Mission accomplished. Union put back together. But now, back to what I left you guys with on Wednesday. I asked you, what's harder, right, the war or the peace? And the general consensus was it's a lot harder to make peace than it is to make war. Especially when the war was amongst yourselves, and the peace is now, at least in an attempt to bring back a portion of the country who thought for a short time that they were their own nation. So it's a compelling question. There's a couple things that need to be resolved by Reconstruction that we need to deal with. So we fought the war, we've put the Union back together, check. That's done. We've settled this issue of secession. But what are some things that need to be resolved now? My question of what next. So tell me, as I call on a couple of you guys, what do we need to resolve now? There's a couple different things we can get to. Scarlett, what do you have for one?
Like, what to do with, like, free blacks?
One more time?
Like, what to do with, like, blacks?
Yeah, what do we do with freed slaves? And blacks in the North? What do we do with them? 4 million, approximately, people have had their status changed legitimately overnight. That's a big issue that we need to face. What's another issue we need to face? Maddie, go ahead.
The Confederate generals, too.
Oh, yeah. All these people seceded from our country, or tried to, and founded their own nation. What do we do with them? Yes?
The South will be rebuilt.
How do we rebuild the South? The South is destroyed. Thank you, Sherman, for lighting much of 2 states on fire. But yeah, the South needs to be rebuilt. Who's going to pay for it? The South has war debt. Who's going to pay for it? What other issues need resolving? Anybody? Please.
The economy.
The economy. 4 million people were unpaid labor. Their whole economic system was built on cotton. Now their labor isn't unpaid, and they have competition for cotton. So there's a whole bunch of issues that need resolving. Political issues. How do we let these southern states back into the Union? Social issues. What do we do with all these freed slaves? Economic issues. Right? How do we create a new southern economy that in theory, we'll see how in practice it looks a little different, but in theory, isn't based on slavery. And a bigger question is, how do you reconstruct a South that does not want to be reconstructed? How do you fix a social system and an economic system in the South that the South would argue wasn't broken in the first place? You can't fix something for somebody else when that person doesn't think that thing is broken. Does that make sense? That in the South, a lot of these former slave owners are going to want to go back to the way things were. Wasn't broken in their eyes. Keep in mind that now that the war is over, these people willingly fought a war to defend the institution of slavery. Are they going to come back and be like, cool, equal rights, let's go. Let's push the South into the 19th century? Absolutely not. There's a quote that I'm going to say now, and it's going to be referenceable for much of today and also Wednesday and Thursday. And it's quite simply, you can't legislate morality. You can't legislate morality. You can't pass laws that make people more moral. You can't change people's mindsets with a bunch of laws. Think for just a moment from a Southern slaveholding perspective. 1 year, you're willing enough to go up in arms to defend slavery. The next, you have lost the war. You have, in theory, lost slavery. You have lost economic control. You come back into a union in which a bunch of pro-national government Republican legislation is passed. And maybe you go home to a destroyed farm. Maybe you go home to dead people in your family. Maybe you go home to the wake of General Sherman in rural Georgia. And everything that you held dear is gone. And we asked that question last week, whose fault is that? It's their own. But it's still a reality that has to be dealt with after the war. So today we're going to talk about this idea of how to win the war. And now for today's conversation, much more importantly, how to win the peace. The goals of Reconstruction will be different based on who you're talking to. We'll get into that today. But there's a good, compelling argument that could be made that the North won the Civil War. Well, that's not an argument, that's a fact. The North won the Civil War, but the South won Reconstruction. And then by Thursday, we'll get to a place where I can have you at least thinking critically about whether or not that's true. Did the South win Reconstruction? And it comes back to that idea of you can't reconstruct a population in a society that does not want reconstructing. You can't legislate morality. How do you win the peace? So, before I let you start reading two really important perspectives for today, it's important that we understand Reconstruction on a spectrum. Reconstruction on a spectrum from full federal government authority to no federal government authority. Well, like most things politically, it's not black and white. It has a spectrum. On the full radical, there's a couple questions this weekend about the radical versus moderate Republicans. This should clear it up. On the full radical side are those in Congress and in the United States that want to fully punish the South for their actions. They started this war, they seceded, we won, deal with it. People like Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner, who has recovered from being beaten over the head with a cane, and he's taken up this Northern cause again. These people are in favor of full federal supremacy. The federal government should be in charge of Reconstruction, guaranteeing, for example, that freed slaves get the right to vote. Guaranteeing that we don't revert back to a system that looks like slavery. Guaranteeing that the South isn't going to make their own decisions, because we know what's going to happen when the South makes their own decisions. In favor of full federal supremacy, full federal authority over black civil rights. We'll get into that today as well. And in favor of a full military occupation of the South. Using the U.S. Army to go into the South and make sure laws are followed. Take 20 seconds, talk to your partner. Why would they think this military occupation is necessary? Go.
I think in the recent day, I could say something about you know how the Reconstruction had the branches and the 5 different things. You're talking about.
All right, 20 seconds up.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me,
and it says something about
Mr. Vargas. Why would they think that using the military is justified and necessary?
To make sure we don't go to another war by them spreading ideas of succeeding again.
Sure, to make sure that we don't go through this again. Cool. Why else, Terry? There are still people willing to fight for their beliefs. Sure. Diana, why else?
We're saying, like people said, because they didn't want another uprising to happen.
Yeah. By the end of the Civil War, what is the Civil War being fought for? Union, sure, but but slavery, right? Lincoln, this new birth of freedom. The argument here is that if we're going to have this new birth of freedom, we need to make sure that that birth is a happy and safe one. We have the more moderate side of things, still on the Republican side, still in the same party, but less aggressive, less punishment-minded. People like Lincoln that are more worried about putting things back together. Let's put this whole thing behind us. Lincoln's second inaugural address is the best possible look at the modern Republican mindset. With malice towards none, charity for all, let's move ourselves forward. Make sure this doesn't happen again. It's the more moderate side. We have the more unionist side, and now we're getting more into the democratic side of things, with people like Andrew Johnson, who we'll get into today. That really doesn't have any desire to punish the South necessarily. Let's just go back to the way things were. As I told you, the Andrew Johnson line, which is best for understanding his approach to Reconstruction, the Union as it was, back to the way things were, and the Constitution as it is. We don't need any constitutional changes. We don't need any union changes. Let's just put things back together. We know slavery's out, but let's just move ourselves forward. And then moving forward over here more towards the Redeemer South, all the way on this spectrum to the KKK, a new organization we'll get into today, that would much rather go legitimately back to the way things were with reinforced black intimidation and white supremacy. So all of these people have a different view on Reconstruction. On this side, oh, here we are, back into the states' rights argument. Let the states decide how to move forward. You wanted us back in your union so bad? Cool, you fought us to get us back in our union, but we're going to go back to making our own decisions. Let Alabama decide who can vote. Let Mississippi decide who's a citizen. Let Texas decide who's equal. Let the states decide. They want to reinforce a system of freed slaves as second-class citizens, right? Yes, you're not a slave anymore, but you are no way equal. They want to reinforce that. And they want the lack of military occupation, but home rule. Let us run our own places. Let us do our own thing. So this is the spectrum of what Reconstruction looks like. And we're going to go through different phases in American history where these guys are in charge. And then where these guys are in charge. And then eventually, once Reconstruction falls apart, spoiler alert, it does, when these guys are more in charge, in the South at least. So we'll get into all that this week, but it's helpful to keep this spectrum in mind in terms of who's who and who thinks what. But it all goes back to this idea, which is now what we've been fighting about since literally day one. Federal supremacy, states' rights. What group in history would have been over here on this side?
The Whigs.
Louder, what? The Federalists, absolutely. Who else? The Whigs, yes. Yes, the pre-Civil War Republicans, exactly. And over here would have been, not over here, I'm not saying he's a KK member. But on the states' rights side, more of the Jeffersonian, Jacksonian perspective. All right, let the states decide for themselves. Less federal government is a better federal government. Cool? So here's your key concepts. They're up there for today. There's two prompts. One is maintaining from last Thursday's prompt. The second, if you could read it, please, for us, Mr. Ventura.
Evaluate the extent the Civil War impacted the...
The second one, Ventura. Jesus.
Oh. Evaluate the extent to which Reconstruction maintained continuity and fostered change in American politics and society.
Cool. Super good prompt. How much is this era of Reconstruction, how much continuity is present, what things are continuing the same, and where there are some significant political changes that we'll get into today as well. Cool? So that's where we're going, that's what's going on. But the first thing I need us to do is we need to understand two perspectives because it's going to help us access everything else for today. The first perspective is the Southern white slaveholding loyal to the Confederacy perspective. This whole idea of why won't they want to be reconstructed. And then we're going to look at the perspective of what do the freed slaves want? What are they asking for? Okay? So once we access these texts and figure out why they're so far apart, and what the two sides really desire, it'll help us understand why Reconstruction is such a struggle. Okay? So the first document you're going to read is from a man named Karl Schurz. Nice German name of his. He's going to be a visitor to the South to really try to figure out what's happening in the South after the Civil War. He's going to publish a whole bunch of his reports, his essays on what he's seeing in the South post-Civil War, which is really a treasure trove of information for a nerd like me. Fortunately for you, I picked out just 3 paragraphs instead of the whole 300-some pages of what he wrote. So you're going to read 3 paragraphs and identify for me on your notes what is his worry, what is his concern about Southern loyalty after the Civil War. Okay? So you're going to take 5 minutes. I'm going to give you 4. You can handle it. 4 minutes to just get into that text and tell me what is he concerned about. What are his concerns? What is he worried about? What does he see in the South in regarding loyalty? 4 minutes, answer into your column, and then we'll talk about it as a class. Go.